Tasting, 5, 6, 7.
Tasting, is that what you said?
Yes.
Are we good, Ruthie? All right, let's get started, you guys. First of all, welcome. And, I think we'll turn this off. Yeah, it's on now. How is everybody tonight? How's the food, by the way? Is it good? Did we run out, or was there actually enough? There's a tiny bit left. Okay. Okay. Well, Ruthie, now that you've done that, we have to say thank you to everybody that brought stuff tonight as well. So, yes, appreciate that. All right, so welcome to the week one of the 8-week class on the book of Revelation. Is anyone excited about studying the book of Revelation this next 8 weeks? I am too. This is a kind of a brash undertaking to talk about the apocalypse with more than two people. Like it might be a problem if just you and I.
It might actually have been a problem even at 2.
Yeah, it might have been a problem with one.
Yeah.
Has anyone read the book of Revelation and had a problem by yourself? So a couple things. First night we got some business to take care of. First of all, I want to introduce you to Matthew Springer. This is Matthew, everybody.
Hello, everyone.
Matthew is really smart, and so I figured it'd be good to have at least one smart person for the class.
Smart Alec, you mean?
No, touche.
So both Alex and I have a bit of we discovered as we were doing this class, both of us have a bit of a smart Alec streak. And I definitely have a quota of stupid things I will say in this class.
What is the quota, by the way?
I will try and... I don't actually know that the quota would impede me from saying more stupid things above the quota.
It's like a really high deductible.
I'll try not to run through it all the first week, but we'll see how this goes.
And so Matthew has... You've been a Christian since...
I was 3.
Since you were 3.
Yep.
Yeah, so you're brand new at this.
Right, brand new.
And your dad did a lot of teaching in his church.
Yeah, my dad had come to the faith through the Navigator Bible study before I was born.
He was a military guy, right?
He was a military guy. Yeah. He was in the Army at the time. My mom had kind of just always been a Christian. She doesn't even remember when it happened.
Yeah.
And I remember very vividly when I became a Christian when I was 3 years old. So pretty much my entire life. So
yeah, I think my first memory is around that time. You remember becoming a Christian. I remember running to the bathroom.
Yes. I was
being really proud of myself that I had been potty trained. You're married and you have 2 daughters.
I am married. I have 2 daughters.
And if anybody likes Girl Scout cookies,
yes.
you're the one to talk to that time.
It's never too early to begin selling Girl Scout cookies.
You work for Google.
I do. I even have the T-shirt too. So miraculously, I have my Google T-shirt on.
So one of the questions tonight will be: is Google part of the Antichrist system?
Yeah, that's not until week 8.
Yeah,
you'll have to wait a while.
This is an intervention.
Oh, okay.
By the way.
Cool.
Yeah, your wife asked me to set this up, so
that sounds like something my wife would do. So. Yeah, this may prove to have been a poor lifestyle choice, but I mean for all of you, not necessarily for me. So we'll see.
Well, Google has, what did you say, 27,000 employees, and you're like number 11.
No, 187,000 employees. We have 180,000.
They had layoffs this morning. I don't know if you
they did? Okay, cool.
You'll find out about
it. I didn't get the memo.
So Google has 180,000. You were like number 11,000.
1,100.
Yeah, you were number 144,000.
Yes, I was in the first 144,000.
That's good.
So,
all right,
yeah,
so
definitely.
So our goal for this 8 weeks, other than to have fun, and if we do too much of this, we'll be the only ones in here having fun. But it'll still be fun. Our goal is to teach about the Book of Revelation. So it's a risk because I became a Christian in '81, and I found out soon that people had different opinions about the end times, and some people are passionate about it, and so. Our goal tonight, our goal for this class is not to push our particular viewpoint. Although Matthew and I have similar viewpoints, they're not identical, but they're similar. It's not to try to get you to go from where you are to some other place. It's not to try to convince anybody of anything. It's not to sell books or tapes. I wish. We are selling books, but they're not our books.
This is a merchandising opportunity we may have already missed.
We're selling somebody else's books.
Yeah.
So we would ask that you, and I think you probably already are, just come with an attitude as a learner and be willing to consider other viewpoints, because one of our things that we will be doing is presenting the 4 primary ways of interpreting the book of Revelation. So most American Christians are familiar with one approach. If you've read The Late Great Planet Earth, if you're old, or if you've read the Left Behind series, if you're middle-aged, and I don't know if there's a young iteration.
I don't know if there's a fictionalized account for one thing. So the
youth version of Left Behind, yeah.
Funnily, if you do a search for End of the World on Amazon, the top result confidently predicts the end of the world in 2027. So you've got a couple of years to brush up before that particular.
We're hoping it doesn't happen before the 8 weeks.
At least not before November. Otherwise,
put a lot of work into this class.
Yeah, we put a lot of work in.
Really disappointing. So, yeah, it's apparently it didn't happen in '88. So, yeah, exactly. So we'll do our best job to teach. Let me walk you through the curriculum, and everybody got these are for everybody, not just for the students. If you don't have one, raise your hand. Did we do pretty good? Let's give it up for Karen, who welcomed everybody tonight. So open your booklet while you're eating. Get food on it if you can. So page 3 is the table of contents. It'll tell you what we're talking about each of the 8 weeks. Oh yeah, let's do that right now. If you haven't put your name on the lower left front or somewhere on the front, like if you're Jeff, please do so, because I guarantee you tonight when we lock up the building, there'll be half a dozen of these things laying around, and we'd like to know who they belong to. So put your name on it. Our intention is not to give out more of these. So now that you've got one, the last class we did, we kept giving out copies because certain people were lazy and left their copies at home. So hopefully your copy will get worn out. The first thing that happens after the table of contents is the actual book of Revelation. So you might be asking, why did you bother to reprint it? We have Bibles. And the reason is because this is part of what's called the manuscript method. So the manuscript method is you're looking at a blank slate, so to speak, and then you're reading it with fresh eyes. And so if you pick the student option, then you probably got some colored pencils, hopefully. And good. And so each week, starting next week, you'll be given an assignment to look for a certain theme within the section of Revelation that you have. If you want to do the penciling, because I think it's helpful, if nothing else, I would encourage you to read Revelation. So, for example, next week we're hitting chapters 1 through 3. It would be great if you could read chapters 1 through 3 this week. The homework for that won't be due until the following week. So technically, you'll be reading it and penciling it next week. But if you're looking for themes and circling them, which is basically what penciling is, then I find that reading actively is way different than reading passively. And for some people, it works better than others, depending on what kind of a learner you are. But if you're reading this with a colored pencil in your hand, you might be surprised that you notice things that you haven't noticed before. This class will be good if it's interactive. And so as you read each section, I want you to write down questions or circle things that are interesting to you or that you want to say something about, or that you're curious what other people think. And so a lot of this, we have a lot of time. We go until just before 8 with this part. We totally will welcome questions and dialogue. If your question totally has to do with what we're covering in week 3, then it's possible we'll say, good question, we'll answer it in 2 weeks, or whatever. Or it might be something that's germane to the whole book, and then we'll talk about it then. No question's a bad question, as long as you're being nice. So please be nice. Like if you ask Matthew, how could you be such an idiot to believe that? That would technically not be a nice question.
It is a question.
It's a question.
Yeah.
It is. Yeah. But I don't want you to be afraid.
I had to learn that after I got married, that not all questions are created equal. So. Okay. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You're not really doing that.
Yes, I am wearing. Yes, I chose not to.
Well, I was going to up until a couple of seconds ago.
Yeah. So turn to page 7. After I've divided it into 7 sections, and you'll see soon enough why I've done that. And so, in a sense, the way we've divided the book and putting numbers on it is a form of editorializing. So I apologize for that up front. It's not a completely blank manuscript, but ideally, every week you'll be marking your copy, your manuscript up like crazy, and then you'll be writing notes or questions, whether they're just for yourself or whether they're for the class. And honestly, put a little star next to your questions that are good for the group, because if you're thinking about it, somebody else is thinking about it too. And we may or may not have answers for you, but we'll do the best that we can.
Not having answers, I think, is one of the things Alex and I really talked about early on in the prep for this. Is the default answer a lot of times is going to be, it could be a lot of things, we don't know. Because it's a complex, dense book. It could mean a lot of stuff. And so we want to, I would rather this class be an exercise in intellectual humility on our part than a class that will answer all your questions. Because a class that can answer all your questions, I would be very suspicious of the methodologies involved. But that's one of the things I think we had talked about is we don't know is an answer that you're going to probably hear a lot.
Yeah. Although I think I'm more intellectually arrogant than you are. So if I start...
Oh, yeah?
I think I am. Yeah, and honestly, this is for you to dig in for yourself and figure out what you think. And so you can leave this class with the same or with a different perception, understanding of the book. So our goal is not to line you up to our view. It's to get you interacting with the text. It says in the beginning of Revelation, first chapter, that you're blessed if you read this out loud. And so we'll be doing a lot of reading of this book out loud for the goal of receiving a blessing. And I have been blessed by Revelation dramatically. My understanding of the scriptures is, and I think this is common, is heavily shaped by how I understand the book of Revelation. My understanding of the world around me is heavily shaped by my understanding of the book of Revelation. And that's why on the cover it says, viewing the world through the book of Revelation. And so we will have succeeded on some level if this thing colors how you view the planet around you. And I think you could say Revelation is God saying, here's what the world actually is, which is a scary thought because of what's in the book, right? I mean, it's a lot of people start Revelation and they get scared. Like, maybe another
Well, it's terrifying, so there's a reason to get scared.
Yeah. And the world is a terrifying place, and it is also a completely safe place for those who are in the kingdom. Safe meaning that you might get martyred before this thing is over.
Eternally safe, perhaps not temporarily safe.
Yeah, exactly, which is a radical way to view the world. And so that's what we're getting into. The middle of the book, pages 34 and 35, is the Bible Project's poster. I don't know if anyone's familiar with the Bible Project. We often show their videos at church when we're not doing the STEPS booklets. And so this is their synopsis of it. If you want to have some fun, look up the Bible Project Revelation on YouTube, and you'll see two 11-minute segments on this. And this isn't even the view that we're purporting. So it's just how they've divvied up the book. But I thought that would be fun. It very conveniently actually accidentally fit on the middle fold so that it's not cut in half. All right, so turn to page 36. I think most of you know you have an option to take this class as a student or to audit it. If you audit the class, then you're literally all we're asking of you is to come and hang out and ask your questions or make your comments. If you're taking it as a student, you're making, I think, about a 5-hour per week commitment. And so you're committing, you're really digging into the book. What's involved as a student is homework, including reading chapters of William Hendrickson. Hendrickson wrote in the 1920s, and this is a book that has stood the test of time, promoting a particular approach, which you may or may not like or agree with, but it's a compelling read. It is not an easy read. The homework for this week is the first, I think, 6 chapters through page 59, whatever that is. And so some of you got the book early and have started reading it. Good for you. Don't let the book freak you out. If you're having a hard time getting it, don't think, well, I better stop coming to class. Just go with the flow.
There is a Kindle version available for those of you who are e-reader friendly.
Yeah. I did not find it on Audible. So sometime, I wish it was, actually. I like to do Audible. Anyway, so the students are reading sections of this. After the first week, you'll just be reading 2 chapters at most. Many weeks you'll be reading 1 chapter. As a student, you're committing to the penciling exercises. So, and it'll give you instructions, actually in the front on page 36, it talks about the homework commitment. Richard, did you have a question?
Yeah, so Revelation 22, the last chapter, are there other chapters?
Oh, please don't tell me that.
Stop it,
Oh my gosh. Well, that's very sad. It's a typo. I haven't decided. I haven't decided verses 11 through finish.
It may not turn out the same way this time, Alex. What's up with you?
Yeah. Well done.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. Don't add or take away from it. But I took away the part that says that. You see that? So I took away the part that says don't add or take away from. So I'm innocent because of that. Touche, Serena. So I think what I'll do is next week I'll bring the rest of chapter 22 and a stapler. Honestly, that's the plan. So thank you for catching that. Now that I've made all these booklets.
These are nice booklets, by the way.
Yeah, except
Really
for that. Also, if you're a student, you'll do some kind of a final project. And so the students of you, and you can decide halfway through that you want to be a student. You're successfully a student if you read the book, if you do the penciling, and if you do some form of a final project. So you can decide literally the last week. What the students will do is come to a dessert that we'll host maybe here, and then people will share their projects if they want, and we'll give out certificates, blessing certificates for those who do it. Final project, I'm really open to creative ideas. What I've put here is you can write a paper on any theme from the class. We're only asking for a minimum of 500 words. So you can do 500 words is like one page, or maybe yeah. So you know what? That's the second typo. Because it was supposed to be 1,500 words. So I'm like literally saying, why is it 500 words? So take your pen if you have one, and I'm not kidding, and put a 1 in front of the 5. So 1,500 words is a page and a half, single-spaced, typed. So that's a very, very simple paper. If you want to write a 10-page paper, I will read it. I will enjoy it. So if you write a 30-page paper, I'll probably still read it, but I won't really like you anymore very much. But you can also, in lieu of the paper, you can write a poem on anything from the book. Basically, you be creative about anything that's within these 22 chapters, including the second half of the chapter I left out. You can write a song. You can make a drawing or a painting. So some of you are artists, or you used to be artists. I've taught this before, and we did a thing before where everybody turned in a drawing from that week's stuff, and I still have my lame. I'm not an artist, so I was chuckling as I saw my stick figures and stuff. And then any artistic expression connected to the book, and bring it. And so when we have our dessert, bring your final projects, and some of you may be willing to share, either if it's a relatively short paper to read it, if it's a painting or a picture or a song or a poem, to share it. You won't be required to do that, but I'll need you to turn it in, and then it's just a pass-fail. So if you do the stuff to some degree, then you pass and you get the certificate for that. And of course, the certificate has no meaning outside of our church. So you can't take it to the community college and ask for credit for a religion class.
And we didn't clear it with God that you'll get brownie points in heaven either. So
I'm pretty sure they will, though.
No.
Well, yeah.
I'm pretty sure you won't.
Okay. I'm pretty sure you're right. Yeah. What about that, Matthew? Have you thought of that?
But not this certificate.
Well, how do you know? Does it say in Scripture that it won't be a certificate?
Yes, it says it right there on the part you left off.
Okay, in chapter 22. All right. If you want to be a student, but we ran out of books, Karen, if we ran out of books, then we'll order more. And then also, if you want to do the penciling, but you don't want to read the book, I'll be bringing more pencils next week. They just won't be, they'll be like loose pencils of the 7 colors. Karen, do we have any books left? Yeah. Okay. Okay, so if you want to be a student, or if you want to buy one of the books, we're just asking for $20 if you're doing the student thing. I think that explains that.
We should also mention Alex and I are going to try really hard not to go down tangents. It's very difficult for both of us, but try and keep us honest if we're like, yo, tangent. So,
Yeah, wave at us. Say, can we get back to the Book of Revelation instead of Tolkien or whatever? The general order for the evenings will be worship. Thank you, Jeff, wherever you are. We have a couple different worship leaders, and so that was awesome. And I noticed your worship was sort of revelation-y. It reminded me of Revelation chapter 4, so well done on that. Give Jeff a hug. Give any worship leader a hug if their song is connected to the Book of Revelation. I'll do some introductory comments, which are particularly longer tonight. Matthew's going to do two things. So Matthew's going to share an example of somebody a Christian who thought the world was ending at a particular time and how it turned out. So we'll start with that tonight in a few minutes. Matthew's also going to talk about historical stuff. And here's the big point I wanted to make as an intro, is really this applies to any reading of Scripture. And you don't have to do what I'm about to say, but if you don't, you won't really understand Scripture very well. So the basic rule is you recognize that whatever you're reading in Scripture was written by one person to another person, not named you. So every Scripture is we're looking in on a conversation or a written conversation between a person typically and a group of people or another person. A lot of the New Testament epistles are one person to another. Paul's pastoral letters are, and we get to read them. But whenever we're trying to interpret, and of course you cannot read the book of Revelation without interpreting. All apocalyptic literature says this is not going to make sense to you first reading, so you get to interpret it. Whenever you interpret, what you want to do is you want to first say, what were they saying to each other? And then after that, and that theological term is exegesis, which may or may not be helpful, but it's the whole idea that we're looking at someone else's conversation. So if you're interpreting it, the first question you ask is, what do we think they heard when this was said to them? And then you interpret after that. But if you skip a step and you start interpreting immediately, I think this is about these grasshoppers that are described. I think those are helicopters. I'm pretty sure they're helicopters. Or stars falling from the sky. Those are definitely nuclear weapons. Now, the question is would a member of one of the 7 churches in Western Turkey have thought about nuclear weapons when they were reading the book? Of course, the answer is no. And so you can get to nuclear weapons if you want to, but what we'll be pushing all 8 weeks is what were they hearing? And if you're coming up with something that would contradict what they would have been hearing, then you really need to hold it lightly. Very, very much so. And so, of course, that begs the question, well, what did they hear? I mean, and especially when there's these incredible images. And they couldn't Google it. It's before
hadn't
Matthew
been
was
invented yet.
Yeah. But for the biggest answer to that question is, what does the Old Testament say? Because Revelation quotes the Old Testament like mad. If you're familiar with the Old Testament, you will constantly see, oh, okay, this is very similar to what I read in Ezekiel or what I read in Daniel. And so that's the first big thing. The other thing, which is not as readily available to us, is verbiage and things that were happening in the first century. The good news is particularly the last 60, 75 years, there's a tremendous amount of information about first century Mediterranean world. And so Matthew is a nerd like I am, maybe slightly nerdier.
I'm going to argue that since I'm a software engineer at Google, I'm about as geek as you get.
Yeah, you're really good at that. And so one of his passions is first century culture. And so what he'll be sharing every week is examples of what life was like in the first century Jewish, Greek, or Roman world. And those things will impact your reading of the book of Revelation as you go through it. So I think that might be the freshest thing that you get from this class. So any questions before we jump in? Let's see, I want to make sure I didn't forget anything.
We should probably pray before we
NIV, yeah. But whatever, doesn't matter. As long as it's not the New World Translation, I'm cool. Lord Jesus, would you please, as Jeff prayed, would you fill this room with your presence? And Lord, I ask that you would descend upon us with your Spirit. and that you would begin bubbling up within us and upon us, work of your Holy Spirit, that as we read the words of John to these churches, that you would become alive in the room. And I ask that you would transform us. I ask that you would heal us. I ask that we would learn how to love each other in deeper ways, Lord, and ask for your help for me and Matthew, but for all of us, Lord, that we wouldn't be afraid, Lord, but we would be encouraged and actually blessed. So please fill this room with your Spirit. Fill us with your Spirit, Lord. Would you come and fill this room, Lord? Even as the opening description of you walking amongst the gatherings, amongst the churches, would you walk through our room right now? Thank you, Jesus. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you for that.
So I somewhat cheekily entitled this segment A Brief Intro to the End of the World. One of the things, what the purpose of sharing these anecdotes is to let us feel like it's totally normal to think we're living in the end of the world. That's actually the default position throughout most of Christianity for the last 2,000 years, actually. If you look back, it's completely normal to think you're living in the end times. Whether or not you're actually living in the end times, I don't know, but the experience of looking up and patiently expecting that the world could end at any minute with the triumphant return of Christ is a completely normal experience in Christianity. Paul actually deals with this in 1 Thessalonians. He's got a church that's literally camped out on their rooftops waiting for the sky to fall. And he says to them, like, you guys got to work too, right? I understand you're very eagerly expecting all these things, but like, you need to eat and you need to like keep working. So the goal of this is not to make anyone feel belittle anybody in any way for believing in any of this stuff. It's totally normal to expect the world to end at any minute. I think it says a lot about the stress of daily life, and a lot more about what our experiences of daily life rather than necessarily about the end of the world. So that said, I do want to comment, Americans seem particularly susceptible to this thinking. And part of the reason is we always picture the story in terms of the plucky survivors, of which, of course, we will be one. Nobody ever makes an end of the world movie that's 10 minutes long and everybody's wiped out in the first 10 minutes. Because that's not a very exciting story, right? We always picture ourselves as the survivors of the zombie apocalypse, not part of the hordes of zombies. So part of what I want to talk about in these end of the world moments is what tools people got in trouble employing to get themselves into a position where not only could they not really back down from the position, they may have made choices that were probably not optimal had they just held their beliefs a little more loosely, right? So there's a certain intellectual humility, I think, that is good to model. I don't want to mock or in any way denigrate any of the brothers or sisters from history who earnestly held any of these beliefs. Again, totally normal. It's completely normal to think you're living in the end times, and then humans do a thing where they fit the pattern. We're so good at pattern recognition. They fit the pattern even if the pattern isn't really there, right? So one of the ones I want to talk about right now, and I know Tim isn't here, right, so I can get away with this.
Yeah.
I want to talk about the Millerites. Has anybody heard of the Millerites before? Have you heard of the Great Disappointment? So there was a guy named William Miller, and he was a former Army captain in the War of 1812. And he, at some point, right after the War of 1812, got religion and got appointed himself as a Baptist preacher and began to earnestly study the scriptures. And his study specifically of the meaning of numbers in a thing we call numerology absolutely convinced him that the world would in fact end March 21, 1843. And he published this in a book Because if you're going to predict the end of the world, you need the book to come out at least 5 years in advance, just so you know. So he publishes a book in 1836, confidently predicting the end of the world for March 21, 1843. I don't want to give too many spoilers, but the world did not, in fact, end, as far as we can tell, March 21, 1843. So he revised his calculation for October 22nd, 1844. And,
Which is when it did end.
Which, strangely, no.
Still no.
So,
Okay.
no, still no. So this came to be called the Great Disappointment. Now, Miller, to his credit, backed down and said, well, clearly something must have happened, but we can't know. It's up to God. And his followers are still around. Eventually, they formed the Seventh-day Adventist for the advent of Christ. That denomination is still with us, right? And kudos to anybody that's part of that. But they were formed from the seeds of the Great Disappointment. They got in trouble using numerology, thinking that they had all this stuff sussed out, when in fact they probably didn't have it sussed out. There are some interesting connections to the Baha'i faith, believe it or not, from his prophecy. Fortunately, if anybody predicts here the end of the world and you're wrong, we will not stone you. So don't worry, that's not a thing we're going to do. What I want to go into with these is no, that's actually a different whole thing. Good question, though. But the Millerites were sort of more what I would call normative cosmologically. I mean, they really were just a denomination of Christianity. They didn't. I don't want to get into Jehovah's Witnesses now.
Week 3,
Good question,
chapter
though.
7 of Revelation.
But anyway, I did want to talk about the Great Disappointment because it's a fun little snippet from American history. So hug a Seventh-day Adventist if you find one.
Those guys did a great job of building hospitals all over the world and schools.
They did.
Yeah.
They even have the Wikipedia entry on the Great Disappointment is awesome reading. If you're really, really heavily into geeking out on history like I am. So yeah.
Cool. All right, so now you're going to take us through a culture segment in the Roman Empire. And I did want to mention, I forgot to say that we're going to end class about 10 till 8 each week, and we're going to break into groups of 3s. And I just would encourage you to stick around and just take 2 people, and we'll have you pray on a theme each week. So that'll be the last thing that we do.
Oh, I forgot the one fun fact. There was another Christian radio host who I believe confidently predicted that the end of the world was also May 22nd, 2011, and then revised outward to, I think, 2013 or later that October. I don't remember which one. We'll see how that one pans out when we hit 2011. So, oh, yeah. It's difficult to actually keep up with all the end of the world predictions. The current bestseller on Amazon, 2027. Get your copy now. It's probably
Did you say 2011?
No, 20. Yeah, when we hit 2011, we'll know if the world ended.
Well, we're past 2011.
What? Shows you what kind of historian I am.
I got you now.
All right. What I wanted to talk about, the thing that I'm actually here that's the useful part of my knowledge is not end of the world talking. It's about ancient societies. So I have even though my background is an electrical engineer, I also had a minor in medieval history. And some parts of the ancient world, if you were magically transported back to the year, 100 or whatever, some parts would look very normal to you. Use of cash for transactions, police force, civil society. Certain other things would be completely alien to you. Alex and I were joking as we were in Cave Girl Coffee that the fact they give out pepper in the restaurant for free. Does anyone know why that's wild? Yeah, the price of pepper throughout the entire Middle Ages was fixed as its own weight in gold. So they're literally giving out packets of gold dust. Don't tell anybody because it's right next to the salt and the sugar, which are also insanely valuable. And I don't want to spoil this for anybody, but if you go to Cave Girl Coffee, they have metal silverware. Mm-hmm. Yep. Salt and pepper. Yep. What I wanted to talk, as we began organizing the thing, and I realize I only have, somebody joked, I think Ruth was telling me, oh, you talk too? This is wild. The problem may be getting me to shut up, not actually talking too much. So the thing, as we organized the sort of moments from history, one of the things that's the most basic thing about traditional and ancient societies that you can't really get your head around as a modern day American is the level of class consciousness and status consciousness. Ancient societies are incredibly hierarchical. The only thing on the planet even approaching this today is the Indian caste system, which they are actively trying to kill. But this is like that, only many, many, many times more rigid and stratified. We talked about a little bit of this in the podcast for the week, but the entire notion that Americans have that we're trying to achieve an egalitarian society would be completely foreign to somebody in the ancient world. They would be like, you want society to all be equal? Doesn't that violate the natural order? Like, you have no idea how much status and power relationships in ancient societies colored everything. If you were a woman, you were automatically at least one or two notches down, not necessarily the bottom. If you were not rich, if you were not from Italy, we don't really have anything comparable to this in your modern American experience. Even our class signifiers today are nowhere close to what they had in the ancient world. And so two of the topics I wanted to talk about this first week are sort of class status and clothing, believe it or not. Clothing is one of the ways you mark how rich you are and how much status you have. So I think it's in James where he talks about if somebody comes into your congregation wearing a fine robe and wearing a ring, all of us are wearing, or at least a lot of us, are wearing rings that would have denoted our status in the equestrian class. You may be wondering, I thought equestrians were that Olympic sport where they rode around on horses. No, the equestrians are the Roman noble class that's just under the imperial senatorial class. So the Romans, and to a certain extent, most Near Eastern cultures, viewed the entire order of society from the top down based on a series of pyramids. And even the pyramid diagram you see where, slices of pyramid is a little deceptive. It's really a very, very incredibly nuanced pyramid up at the top, 8 to 10%, and then everybody else, right?
So you could tell where somebody was in that pyramid literally by the clothes they wore.
Almost instantly on sight. If they're wearing a large wide leather belt, or if they're wearing a fine robe, or if they're wearing a medallion, they probably have some sort of official function in society. And they probably have some amount of legal freedom to treat you, if you are not from that same rank of society, less well than you would probably like to be treated. So Roman society was very much organized into strata. The one that's the most commonly shows up in the New Testament is citizens versus non-citizens. But that's just one indicator of a whole range of stuff. Paul at one point says, well, I'm a citizen of Tarsus. And he means something legally binding in the sense that the city authorities of the place he has have no legal jurisdiction over him because he's not a citizen of that city, right? And if he had gotten into a legal fight with that city, he would have needed to have hired representation, because even though he was a citizen of Rome and a citizen of Tarsus, he was not a citizen of the city where he found himself, right?
Like he was, I think it was Thessalonica that he got beaten up pretty bad, or Philippi, I think. Yeah, Philippi, he got beaten up pretty badly. And then after the fact, he says, I am a Roman citizen. And so they breached the social strata, and they were in trouble.
Yeah.
And so they basically issued a public apology and escorted him out of town.
So one of the central themes in here is the radical egalitarian nature of the visions of the body of Christ in the book of Revelation. It's very, very different and would have been a very jarring image to people who hung out in the first century, right? Clothing, for instance, is incredibly expensive. It's all handmade. There's a really great lecture somewhere on YouTube called The $6,000 Shirt. And it's a lady who's a professor of ancient studies, and she made herself a linen shirt. And it took her roughly 600 hours to grow her own flax, weave her own linen, bleach it, full it. Like it's a handmade shirt from start to finish. Like Your clothes are incredibly valuable. The fact that you own multiple outfits is weird. And you're eating with metal silverware. I have no idea how you people are this rich, right? You probably have access to all the salt you want too. Anyway, the clothing is not only a status indicator, it's also an indicator of wealth. It's an indicator of, in some case, slave versus free, citizen, non-citizen. Within the Roman hierarchy, it can be an indicator of upper status. So Lydia, I think it's Lydia, who's a seller of purple cloth. Purple cloth is restricted to only the imperial family. So unless you're a member of the imperial household, which would have included slaves actually, you are not legally allowed to wear purple. So you shouldn't wear purple after Labor Day or before Labor Day also, unless you want to get thrown in jail, unless you're a member of the imperial household, right?
Is it actually seasonal like that?
No, it turns out they can arrest you at any time for wearing purple.
Okay.
If you're an equestrian, you get to wear a wide red stripe on the bottom of your toga and a gold ring.
Okay. So you wander into church and you're wearing different clothes. And James is saying, if you treat them differently, then you're missing the whole thing.
Yep.
Don't put them in the front.
Yep.
Yeah.
The other thing to think about the hierarchy is America also has this idea of social mobility. It's a kind of an ideal we kind of aspire to, and we picked it up from Christianity, right? There's this idea that, oh, it doesn't matter, equal opportunity. Like, this would have been completely foreign to the ancient world. You were born into a class, and all you could do was go down, right? It was really hard to climb. Not impossible, but unless you had a pile of money, there was very, very little way to increase the status in society. You could definitely lose your status in society. That was easy. Down is easy. Up is hard. Let's see.
Talk about clothing in Revelation and how that applies.
Well, one of the things that happens in Revelation is people keep being handed clothing. And you may be wondering why would we be so excited about clothing? Because clothing is an official designator of social status. What it indicates is, A, that the person giving the clothing has a ton of money, right? Clothing is so valuable, it's given as a gift, typically at a wedding. So like there's another story in the Old Testament where it talks about somebody going to a wedding and not wearing the clothing that the king had provided, right?
That's a New Testament parable.
That's a New Testament parable?
It is, yeah.
I guess it is,
They get thrown out because they don't have the right clothes.
Right, not
which
wearing
I
the
have
right
never
clothing.
understood that parable.
Yeah, that's why. You were supposed to wear the clothing that the wedding feast provider had provided for you.
Yeah.
Because I guess it beats like gift bag or something like that. But, so have a robe. Let's see. Typically, you wore the same thing every day. You would have had one nicer set of clothes, and at some point, your everyday clothes just wear out to the point they can't be patched anymore. And at that point, your nice clothes become your everyday clothes, and you hope you get invited to another wedding. Let's see. You could inherit if you had
another wedding with an extremely wealthy person.
Extremely wealthy
on the
patron,
top, on the top 1% of the entire pyramid.
Yeah. One of the central takeaways is we'll see as we go through this, the ancient world values different things than we do. The modern critique of a society that should be egalitarian, that should have high levels of social mobility, that should have even legal protections that should be the same across the board, that's a really modern idea, right? That's not an idea you go back into the ancient world, and it's less true in Roman society. Near Eastern society tends to be a little more egalitarian, mostly because they're not wealthy. And so when a culture was assimilated by Rome, one of the reasons they were so successful expanding their empire is they'd come in and they'd first have a little chat with all the local nobility, and they said, hey, why don't you guys get Roman citizens? We'll insert you into the pyramid, pay us taxes, and you guys can continue to run your country because we have really no interest in running your country, right? So you guys continue to hold all your land. We'll take some of your stuff, but not all of it. And we don't have to completely kill all of you, which is going to be a good deal.
Status, nobility, wealth is almost like franchising.
Your Roman Empire was definitely a franchise model.
Yeah. And it was driven on status and wealth.
Yeah, so somebody like Herod the Great would have been considered a Roman client king, and would have also been accorded Roman citizenship and privileges equivalent to an equestrian, even though his family hadn't started out Roman citizens and were not in fact Italian, right? And so if you look at this, we'll talk about this more in another week, but there's really at least three cultures wandering around. There's rural Near Eastern culture, which is where Jesus and his immediate followers are from, where you speak Aramaic and you probably speak Greek as a trade language, but it's very much a rural Jewish Near Eastern culture. There's Hellenized Jewish / Greek, which is its own sort of Eastern Roman culture. And then there's Italian Roman, which is its own sort of different idea. Greek and Roman have a lot of overlap, but the Jewish culture the Romans encountered really had a tough time adjusting to the Roman model. And we'll talk about this in a couple of weeks, how they kind of navigated that.
Okay, that's good. So just to kind of bring it home, we have these Jesus followers saying that, even in the book of Revelation, that you are all a kingdom of priests. So it's like they're granting nobility to every believer.
And social status.
And social status. Suddenly, we've got Caesar being called the Lord of all. That was his title as the top of the social status. We have these Near Eastern Jewish followers of Jesus saying, actually, Jesus is Lord of all, and complete confrontational. We have Paul saying things like, "There's no longer Jew nor Greek nor slave or free or male or female." And so,
what?
Yeah, like literally, this is seditious. You're
Totally.
You're gonna tear our entire culture down.
You can't. Part of the nature of the status of a status-based society is the people on top tend to really like a status-based society, and so they're kind of aggressive about defending it. To be honest, so yeah.
So that's part of that gives you a taste for what these writings, what they were confronting, and it's funny to me that you have sort of the backwater pastoral culture bringing the message of the kingdom of God, sort of like the non-cultured, non-rich, non-hierarchical people coming in and talking about the King of the universe.
Yeah.
And Jesus is Lord, but he died on a cross.
Yep.
Like that, and you can see why Paul says that's foolishness to Greeks. Like don't be comparing him to Caesar, but he died the lowest death on the social scale.
Yeah, the fact that they're worshiping to the Romans an executed criminal who died by crucifixion. The Romans didn't even execute or crucify everybody. That was only reserved for the worst of the worst, right? So, for instance, Paul eventually gets execued by the Romans. He just would have been beheaded, right? They didn't crucify him. I did want to mention I am borrowing because of his citizenship. Yeah, they only crucified non-citizens. I did want to mention I'm borrowing heavily from the Greco-Roman World. It's an InterVarsity Press. Oops, I was hoping to get it brighter, but that's okay. It's just a book about first century culture. It's pretty good. It came out, I think, about 20 years ago from InterVarsity Press. They have a Kindle version of it, and I'll send out the link or something.
Cool.
If you're interested in reading ahead.
Any questions?
This is why I look smart.
Yeah.
So
well, you read. That's good.
I can read fast.
Any questions or comments about any of that?
The name of that book again?
The Greco-Roman World of the New Testament Era, James Jeffers, Jeffers. He has another super exciting book called Presumption and Status in the Ancient Near East, which I assure you is a page turner. I'm just kidding.
For you. All right. So
I have weird hobbies. I don't know.
Grab your book and turn to page 38. So what I'm going to give you now is we're going to do some big picture stuff that we'll be referencing throughout the rest of the class. And so the first section here is fairly information heavy, but I want to give you the wide angle lens on the book of Revelation. And as I do this, make a mental note of where you place yourself in these giant schools of interpretation. So I'm on page 38, just like right point 3 there. All right, so these are the general ways to look at the book. How many have actually read the book of Revelation? Okay, so that's like maybe 90% of you. All right, so there's preterists, which for a lot of people is a dirty word, but this is one of the approaches. They understand the book primarily in terms of its first century setting, claiming that most of its events have already taken place. Now, the reason that people don't like preterists is because one of the things that they believe has already taken place is that Jesus has come back. And the whole thing already happened, and it's sort of like, well, where's the supernatural element? If Jesus came back already, sort of like 1844, you think he would have made more of a splash than that. The strength of the preterists is that they view the book primarily in terms of first century culture. And that's probably the number one mistake that most of us make is we bypass that thing. And so they have an understanding of who was receiving this book, which was the 7 churches in Asia Minor, and what their issues were. Now, what you're going to find out is a lot of the imagery ties very much into a symbol of things that were very well known to these folks. Almost like if I talked about a red football team with an arrowhead on their helmet, those who are male and who care in the room would know what I'm talking about.
The Jets.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Brenda.
I'm bad at sports.
Yeah. But now we read about whatever, and we're thinking, what on earth? The 7-headed dragon, from the city of 7 hills. They knew that everybody knew that Rome was the city of 7 hills.
Oh man, spoiler alert.
I know. Well, it's probably a rabbit trail. So, like if we took a Kansas City Chief helmet logo 2,000 years ago, they would scratch their heads like many of us do when we read the book of Revelation. All right, second category is historicists. They take it as describing a long chain of events from Patmos, where John wrote the book, where he received the revelation, the apocalyptic vision of the end of history. So the idea there is starting in chapter 1, we're like starting at the year 96, or some people think it was in the late 60s. Whenever John wrote Revelation, it's starting at that point when he gets the vision, and we're chronologically going 1st century, 2nd century, 3rd century, kind of like through the book, and so you're reading it from front to finish like it's a continuous story. Now the weakness of that view is we tend to see a lot of repetition. Like, didn't that just happen already? Or it happened, a third of the earth got wiped out, and now it's 2/3. Well, wait, does that mean now it's 100% is wiped out, but then there's a third iteration, the seals, the trumpets, and the bowls. And it's like, why is this continuing to recycle? Sometimes it feels like you're watching a television series that did really well, and so they have to recycle the plot again because they have viewers. But that's the weakness of the historicist view. Another weakness is that we tend to think that the end of the book is where we are now. And so we want to place ourselves, and you talked about this earlier, we want to place ourselves at the climax of the story. And so we tend to think that we're probably right before Armageddon. So we have ourselves in chapter 18 and 19. And so we turn on the TV and we're like, there it is.
So full disclaimer, if the world does end during this class,
you get your money back.
You get your money back. We didn't claim it wouldn't. We just said it was probably not going to end before November. So
yeah, that would probably be the most accurate prediction I could make. It
would be both horrifying and fun all at once.
Yeah, I won't have to give any money back. Most of you will be pretty happy. There's a few of you that you might be really upset when that happens. All right, next one, point 3, the futurists. They place the book primarily in the end times. Now, this is the most common in modern American interpretation, that there's a triggering moment when the end times begin. And so that's what we're all looking for. What is going to be the event that triggers the end? And so, yes, Jeff.
So how many people think our current events in the Middle East are possibly
Yeah,
a sign of the end times?
most people.
Yeah.
Most people do. Most American Christians do. And so this is like the prevailing view, the futurist view. The weakness of that, I mean, we're wondering when the end times are going to start. We're ignoring the words in Scripture about we're in the end times now. Paul seemed to think we're in the end times, so we have to redefine that a little bit less. And we're looking for all of those things. The big one is when is that mosque, the Dome of the Rock, going to get torn down and the temple get rebuilt? And that's when it's gonna happen. Yeah, I mean, or that's the big ugly, and then there's a myriad of iterations, like the one you just mentioned. We see something happen, we can connect it loosely to something that we read about in the book of Revelation. And again, the question has to be: is that what the first century hearer would have heard? Would they have been thinking about Hamas attacking Israel, or whatever, you know? And maybe they were. Maybe it's an iteration of a fulfilled prophecy. But the weakness is the futurists tend to think that whatever's happening in the newspaper now is the launching of the end times. And let me just finish this thought. And if that's true, then the book of Revelation doesn't have any meaning for the first century hearers after chapter 4. That chapter 4 is all for the future. And so if you were some poor soul in Smyrna, if I'm living in one of those 7 cities, that's the one I don't want to live in, is Smyrna.
Smyrna, yeah, probably
Smyrna's
not.
yeah.
Smyrna sucks. Stay out. Ephesus is really nice, though.
Ephesus would be the
My mom's
place
been
to
to
be.
Ephesus. It's
Yeah.
quite nice.
But
I mean, it's a little ruiny
if you're
now,
there,
but-
it's like, well, I really enjoyed the first 3 chapters, but none of the rest of this applies to me. So it's, yeah, because it's not going to make sense until the end times start. And so that's just a weakness. It might actually be a correct view, and of course, I'm already misbehaving because I'm.
Let's reel it back into the 4th.
Thank you.
There you go.
Are you sure? All right. That's good to know. If I talk long enough, people forget their questions. So. Okay. Well.
Alex may actually talk till doomsday, which may be quite far off, actually.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
The 4th view is the idealist view. They view the images in Revelation as symbols, the symbolic pictures of such timeless truths as the victory of good over evil. Now, the weakness of that perspective is, how do we apply it to now? If these are just symbols, what does that have to do with me today? And maybe more specifically, how are these symbols? How do we interpret? How do we get these symbols into our world?
And to be fair, all of these contain truth, right? Some of this stuff did happen. There were absolutely 7 churches in Asia that received this letter. That's a historical fact, right? Some of it is symbolic. Some of it is probably in the future. And,
Yes.
So all of these views contain truth. And kind of the prayer for the class is wisdom to know when to apply what lens. It's unlikely you'll get super far using only one of the lenses, right?
And the truth
Except
is,
the preterists, because they're like, yeah, whatever, and they just stop. So
yeah. These are the 4 general approaches, and then there's 4 specific views that most people hold. If you're really into eschatology, the study of the end times, you're going to be holding to one of the 4 views, which I'll cover next. Each of the 4 views borrows from pieces of all 4 approaches. Does that make sense? So the 4 things we mentioned already, everybody borrows from each of those. I'm not aware of a view that doesn't use some of these, interchange some of these principles or approaches to it. All right, so let's cover the 4 main views, and I'm going to be really quick here because we'll be referencing this as we go along, like I said. So the first one is historic premillennialism, which what I just said might be like, can you please use English? It's the basic, the 4 views are centered around what happens in the 20th chapter of Revelation. There's this 1,000-year thing that happens. It's called the millennium. And so the views are defined on how they view what happens connected to that scene toward the end of the book of Revelation. So premillennialism is basically saying they think that the coming of Jesus will happen right before this 1,000-year reign. And historic premillennialism was the predominant view in the church for the first 5 centuries. So most Christians were, and they didn't name it yet then because that was pretty much the view. It's Jesus is going to come back, and then we have this 1,000-year thing going on.
I didn't put this in the weeks of the end of the world, but man, this caused a lot of upheaval around the year 1033. So you think we were talking about the end of the world in Y2K? No. 1033 was the year.
Yeah.
Well, first it was 1,000, then it was 1033 because they were like off by, maybe we're off by the age of Jesus. So
right.
There you go.
Yeah, any century change, it's
people get weirded out by round numbers. It's just like a thing.
And the 1,000-year changes are huge. For all of us who were around in 1999 to 2000, It's
That's
you know,
week 8. We'll talk about, or week 4, I think. We talk about Y2K bug.
yeah.
Also, Unix week number rollover, which nobody knows about except me.
And
Awesome.
including me, I just
Oh, it's fun.
I just
2038.
cut and pasted in the curriculum. I don't know what you're going to talk about.
Stay tuned.
All right. So, yes. With this kind of a statement, good will defeat evil, Jesus will come and win, and we'll all be with the Lord forever, and everything that's hard right now will be just fine. Which maybe we should just wrap the class up now. I think.
Probably more accurate.
But that, yeah,
It certainly prevents us saying stupid stuff from here to
Well,
there.
it's a brilliant question, and I think
It's a good question.
and that's a perspective. You need to ask that question every week, seriously, because that is it. The issue is we have this book to read, and it says we'll be blessed if we read it, and we have to figure out how to untie this book. And so these are ways to do that. But we have to keep that perspective in play the whole time. Now you might say, I actually don't care. I'm already like, you've already turned me off. It's too complicated. I don't care. And that's honestly where I was for the first 20 years of my Christian walk. It's like, we're not going to solve it. Everyone disagrees. Who cares? But I tell you, if it will bless you as you explore and delve and seek the Lord in it. It will bless you. At least that's what it did to me. So. All right, so that's the first one. The second one is called amillennialism. And again, these definitions are based on when this 1,000-year thing happens. Amillennialism means, it's kind of like atheist means you have no opinion about, you're opposed to the idea of God, atheism. Or amoral means you don't have morals. Amillennial means you don't really take the millennium very seriously. At least this is a name given to the critics of this viewpoint. So it's one of these names that, kind of like the name Christian, making fun of these people that are acting like little Jesuses. It was not a compliment back in the day necessarily. But the amillennialism basically says it presents a continuity of interpretive approach throughout the entire book, which is the idealist thing. It recognizes the original context, Rome, but all the themes are repeating throughout the age. Both the tribulation and the millennium are seen as currently happening. It's a radical viewpoint. So the idea for the amillennialist is these themes that are given in Revelation are currently in play. So the millennium is happening now. The tribulation is happening now. All of these themes that we see are happening now. And so that's the gist of amillennialism. I have a cute little chart for each of these as well. This has been the view held by most people throughout most of the church's history, which might surprise you because it's like, well, that's kind of weird, including the reformers.
It does not sell very many books, though.
Yeah. It's
So
not quite
saying
as
that we're
interesting.
in this long period of history where the world probably won't end and we're just experiencing the things that are in the book does not sell a lot of books.
Well, an amillennialist does believe the world will end, but that
Yeah,
all
but
of this stuff
like
is happening
not-
now. All right. There's a graph here that is an aspect of amillennialism on the bottom of page 39. It's called progressive parallelism. And the idea there is that the book of Revelation is telling one story 7 times. And this will basically be the approach we're taking for this class, right or wrong. And so this is what you'll be kind of contending with. And the idea there is literally chapters 1 through 3 tell the story. So like if you just had those 3 chapters, it would be enough. Chapters 4 through 7 tell this same story with greater detail, increasingly toward the end, to where the last cycle, which is the last 2021 and 22, or in my case, 2021 and part of 22, shows, completely emphasizes the end of the story. So the first several phases show kind of the beginning and middle, and as we go through the repeating cycles, it's an answer to the question, why does this thing seem to keep repeating itself? It's saying, well, it's telling the story 7 times. All right? Page 40 is a graph that I made connected to that. I hope nobody's getting a feel for which view I'm going to be that I like. Third view, page 41, is called post-millennialism. This is the idea that that Jesus will come after the millennium. And the millennium is this time where Christ rules and great things are happening. And the idea is that the Christians in the world are making the world a better place. And so the world is becoming more and more like heaven. because of the Christians. And then once we've completed that work, Christ will come back to a practically perfect world. There aren't a lot of post-millennialists today, but if you were a Christian in the 1800s, it's very likely you were a post-millennialist, particularly a British Christian, because I'm going to pretend I'm British now. We were the ones who were bringing Christianity to the world. We were civilizing the savages. We were building roads and digging what do you call things that carry water? Canals,
Aqueducts
canals,
or canals.
Yeah, sewers. Yeah, we were.
Depends on if you drink out of them or not.
We had technology. We were solving diseases. Chris. Oh, don't be such a downer,
that
dude.
view
Don't
has
be
some
such a
other
downer.
historical baggage.
Progress always has a price, you know. But there really was a sense of we're in the millennium now, and we're making the world a better place through the spread of our culture and also the spread of Christianity. This is missions. This is China Inland Missions. These are all the famous missionaries from the 1800s. And a little bit before.
There is a certain holdover from this view into the next view we'll cover, dispensational premillennialism. And it's the idea that humans actively can cause the end of the world, right? If we just get God clearly left us a checklist. If we buzz through the checklist, end of world, great. I don't actually know that it works like that, right? And it's kind of, when you say it out loud like that, it seems stupid, but it's a very natural thing to think, right? And this was a driver of a lot of missionary activity.
We can bring the second coming.
Yeah, we'll cause it to happen now.
Mission still has it now. If we can reach all the unreached people groups in the world, because Christ said,
which we should do for other reasons, but not like to cause the end of the world.
And if it does cause the end of the world, then that'll be pretty cool.
It'll certainly be spectacular.
And Jesus said something in Matthew 24 that sure sounded that way. But all right, the 20th century pretty much squashed post-millennialism. Because the great progress that we were bringing, we all ended up killing each other in Europe during World War I and World War II. And then the Christian nations, some of them turned atheist and communist, and we're all killing each other and killing ourselves. So this idea, we really, in the 1800s, we thought we were it, that humans were the best thing since sliced bread. And post-millennialism was really popular for people reading their Bibles. And then our depravity was, it's just, you look at the 20th century and it's like, what is wrong with us? What is wrong with us? Final view is currently the most popular view. If you have an eschatology, this is probably your view.
We should define eschatology real quick.
Study of end times.
Study of end times.
Thank you. It's called dispensational premillennialism. This is the Left Behind series. It's the most popular view today. Late Great Planet Earth has us eagerly awaiting the rapture of believers, a first, second coming. And let me define that. The idea, and this is a relatively new idea, that there'll be two second comings. The first one is when all of us, 1 Thessalonians 4, we all fly up in the air, and then we get to miss the tribulation, thank goodness. And then Jesus comes back for the second coming. And it's part of a larger theological system called dispensationalism, thus the term dispensational premillennialism.
Do people know what dispensationalism is? Dispensationalism is a buzzword that theologians invented to describe the idea that God makes covenants with humanity and he treats us differently under different dispensations or different eras. So the idea is that God's dealing with humanity has modes or eras that we are moving through. And so, pre-Abraham is considered one dispensation, and post-Abraham to, I think, the David, to Moses, Moses is the next dispensation. This idea is wildly popular among American theologians, particularly of the Dallas Theological Seminary School. I make no comment as to whether or not it's correct. Dispensationalism is a huge deal, and it has a lot of stuff going for it.
It makes the reading of Scripture really interesting.
It is.
Because you're busy trying to figure out what
dispensation are we in again?
Or you figure out how was God working then. And so the idea there is if you happen to be a God follower in 1000 BC, the way you were saved is different than the way it is now.
Yeah, it also has a lot of interesting theological implications if you subscribe to the school about what does God do with unsaved people. And it's based on an idea of progressive revelation is a big deal in dispensationalism where, well, humans just didn't know stuff back then. And this is very much reinforced by some of the passages in the New Testament where Paul talks about, well, they didn't really know a lot back then. We know more now, right? And we'll know more in the future. And so the idea is God grades on less of a curve also as we go forward in history because you have less of an excuse for not knowing stuff. It's like a kind of a fallout of that basic idea.
I think everybody sees the revelation as progressive, but it's just much more jaggedy.
Parts of that are absolutely true.
Yeah. Julie. Well, you're talking about us, right? Well, I think we meet each other halfway.
The idea is he's at work actively in like base reality, right? I mean, like you would be able to see him and go, oh, there he is.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. From us, it'll look like a rising, but it'll be Christ coming in the clouds while we're rising up. So it's kind of semantics. So less. Yeah.
Great question.
Yeah, those are that's dispensational premillennialism. So you're talking about chapter 11, which we'll get to in a few weeks, and you're talking about the very end, and so we'll discuss that a little bit then. What do those things mean based on how you approach this?
I should mention there's a fifth one we didn't list here, which is go ahead. Panmillennialism. My dad.
Say?
Panmillennialism, exactly. The fifth one. It will all pan out.
Yeah. This is Romans. It's like kind of like, but it's still okay to study it. The early part of dispensationalism is the idea that miracles don't happen anymore. Spiritual gifts don't happen.
I think that's more of a Midwestern
a subset of dispensationalism.
Idea
so most people, probably a few of us in here, would. Yeah, no more tongues, no more healing. We don't get to do that stuff. That's classic dispensationalism, which has pretty much been ignored. But the dispensationalism toward the end times is still very popular. So bits and pieces. On page 42.
And again, a lot of go ahead.
What's that? Which one are y'all? We're generally amillennial.
I'm more of an amillennialist because I'm a big believer in modernity because I'm a historian. Modernity has a lot of fun benefits that I really like metal silverware. So I'm fixated with the silverware, and I don't know what the deal is. But
what does it have to do with amillennialism?
I think God has chewed on human affairs a long time.
Okay.
And things are demonstrably better now than they were 2,000 years ago for the average person.
That sounds like post-millennialism.
Possibly.
Okay. So,
but again, all of these things are an attempt to grapple with really hard issues. So the goal is not to trumpet one at the exclusion of all the others.
Exactly.
And knock anybody down rhetorically or like we're all going to stumble through this together. Alex and I are just stumbling slightly in front of the rest of you, but I am very much stumbling through this. So,
and maybe, I mean, we're saying here's lots of approaches. At least think about that. There's different ways to look at this instead of maybe the one way or the two ways that we've been exposed to. So, yes, Dave. Yes. Yeah. So the idea there is we're in the church age now. That's the current dispensation. It's generally viewed as the sixth one. The seventh one, actually the fifth one. The sixth one's the millennium. Seventh one is heaven. So if I have that right. So the idea there is that the rapture will take place and the tribulation will happen, and then there'll be the millennium. And Jesus will rule on the planet for 1,000 years, probably from Jerusalem in a new temple, the temple that we see described, for example, in Ezekiel 47. And so there'll be a 1,000-year period, literally 1,000 years, where before things go haywire again, where there'll be like a return to the the law, and Jesus will be ruling the planet from Jerusalem.
A literal earthly rule.
And somebody
word
correct me if
literally-
I got some of the details wrong.
The word literally,
They'll reinstitute temple sacrifices.
yeah, the temple will be rebuilt. So
Yeah, because
Alex added that. So
um,
There's a pile of stones behind the building.
yeah. Well, I don't hold to the view, but the questions it seems like Israel is in the middle of the unfolding of the end, and the temple is, because there's a lot of talk about the restoration of the temple, and the question is, how do we interpret that? Is it a brick and mortar in Jerusalem? Do we take the New Testament metaphor seriously that we're the temple? But I agree with you, because Hebrews seems to go a long ways in saying that animal sacrifices have served their purpose and they're done. Julie. Yeah. Yeah. Can somebody answer that question better? Why they would have blood sacrifices in the Millennium Temple? Because I actually don't have a good answer to that question. All right.
dispensational premillennialism tends to be a very it goes hand in glove a lot of times with a very literalist interpretation of Revelation for obvious reasons, right?
Which makes it attractive, because
Right.
we want to interpret the Bible literally.
The special effects are awesome. So it's just
All right, let's move toward the wrap up.
yeah, we should probably
So this is like one of the first. I'm on page 42. One of the first charts of dispensational premillennialism.
1818 or 1918?
I think it's 1918, but
I think
I'm
it's
not
1918.
actually sure. And they've taken the liberties of interpreting the seven churches as symbolic of the 7,000 years of history. And actually, if you look on the middle top right, where my thumb is, you see that the world is going to end.
20 years ago.
In the year 2000. So, and if they did this, whether it was 1918 or 1818, I think it was 1918, because things, as is always the case, things were so crazy on the planet in 1918 that people are really trying to figure this stuff out more so. So they wrote their book 72 years prior, or whatever, 82 years.
Yeah, in my research, I have a lot of advice. If you want to write an end of the world book, hit me up afterwards. I'll give you some pointers.
All right, so the big wrap up. As I said in the beginning, we're wanting to talk about the big picture ways of interpreting the book. Now, your job, particularly if you did the student thing, is to actually read through the book of Revelation with a lot of these ideas floating in your head. Today's lecture was ridiculously top-heavy with theological information. That won't be the case anymore. The rest of the weeks will be primarily talking about the stuff that we're reading. Next week we'll be covering chapters 1 through 3. So we'll actually be discussing the scriptures next week, but we wanted to give the overview as a point of context. And maybe the big point is there are lots of valid ways of interpreting the book of Revelation, and they all are interesting, and they all have their strengths, and they all have their weaknesses. And so if you're willing to go on this journey with us, I guess we'll find out next week if any of you come back, then please come, and we'll jump into it. Mhm. Okay, well done. All right, which makes sense. That's when the Jehovah's Witnesses were starting to really figure out when the end of the world was too. And initially it was 1917. Eventually a date in the 50s, and then 75 was a big date.
One is tempted to make the observation that the end of the world just isn't what it used to be.
Yeah. All right, Rod.
When you said NIV, is that this book or this book or both?
I think he quotes from the NIV wasn't around in the
Yeah.
20s. What I've reprinted is NIV.
The Hendrickson book is from King James.
And if you don't like NIV, I apologize. That's the manuscript. Yes. Yes. You don't have to read Revelation until the week after. But yeah, we'll have you read 1 through 3. I mean, if you want to read it ahead of time, that might be helpful. But as far as the homework, I have it as something you're doing starting next Wednesday.
And when you read Revelations, we'll do the color highlighting of the themes in the passage of Revelation. That's what the color pencils
Yeah.
are for.
And next week,
As you read Revelation, the text, the colored pencils will correspond to these colored themes.
and we'll talk about that next week.
Yeah. Yeah,
Right.
no, it's
Color pencils will
we
make
kinda
sense
buried the lead
next
there.
week. Yeah, we're not there yet. So let's say a closing prayer, and then I would say, let's see, what I put down as the theme for the closing prayer today is the big encouragement, or break into groups of 3, share how you feel about the book of Revelation and what you're hoping to get from this class. So please don't leave yet. We got 5 minutes. Grab 2 people and just share what you're hoping to get and pray for each other that it happens. Thanks, you guys. God bless you, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, everybody.